Well, it's August the 28th, and things move forward with the withdrawal from Afghanistan. As we see, the terrorist attack was about 36 hours ago or thereabouts. It killed 13 Marines, and well, I guess it was 12 Marines and one Navy corpsman. There were two bombings. Apparently, one was a suicide bomber, and one was a bomb that was planted somehow. That's as I had said all along, that I thought the situation there was going to get a bit worse before it got better, so to speak, or it'll never get better. That's one thing that was I kind of as expected. This would be lucky if we can get everybody out of there before there's another attack. I mean, this is it, because it's now becoming a bit of a, if you will, a shooting war. I mean, the ISIS team did a terrorist attack on us, and now we've done a drone strike back on some of their leadership. So this is getting a little bit it's starting to escalate a little bit in that sense. On the other hand, the midnight, August the 31st is coming soon, and remember that they're ahead of us by several hours, so we're getting a lot closer to that event. Plus, it looks to be like the flow of Americans through the airport is becoming a trickle anyhow. And right now it looks like non-governmental, private and non-governmental groups are really driving a lot of the evacuation as well now. So that's kind of how that's going. On the other hand, other developments, of course, have occurred during the week. The budget framework for the big reconciliation bill passed the House with apparently some kind of a condition on it that they will vote on the so-called bipartisan infrastructure bill. So we'll have to follow what that's going on. And then they also are advancing H.R. 4 in the House, past that, which is basically an attempt to reverse a Supreme Court ruling. And we can get into that in a little bit. So if you like these videos, remember to subscribe, give me a like, and you can ring the bell for notifications. At any rate, let's hit this Afghanistan thing a little bit here. One thing I keep hearing, even from some of my favorite conservative sources, are some missing the point. Biden has totally messed this thing up, and I think to some degree, at least Trump waded into those waters, but we don't know what he really would have done. I mean, we know what he started to do. I don't know why he thought he could negotiate a deal with the Taliban, or why he thought he could negotiate a nuclear disarmament with Kim Jong-un. But to some degree, I think Trump considers himself as the ultimate negotiator, and so he will try. However, in the case of the Koreans, you notice he never really made a bad deal either. When they proved non-responsive to our demands, he walked away. And so I tend to think that the same thing might well have happened in Afghanistan as well. I can't imagine he would have gone with a debacle of the level that we see here. On the other hand, everybody's saying things like, well, there's these 80-some billion, I don't know, a large number of American weapons that we should have, except for the weapons that were, say, at Bagram that we apparently abandoned. And there are some examples where we abandoned a base and left things behind, yes. But beyond that, I tend to think that the bulk of the weapons, there's no way you could actually execute a withdrawal and also withdraw the weapons, because they're in the hands of the Afghan military. And while it's collapsing and surrendering, we didn't have enough personnel there to begin to try to collect them all the time. So it was inevitable, if you didn't stay the course to support the Afghan initiative, if you want to call it, that's 20 years old, most of that hardware is going to fall into the hands of the Taliban or other terrorist groups. I mean, that's just a given. I don't see any other way that could have turned out in practice if you're going to do a rapid withdrawal like this under unfavorable conditions. And so that's one thing I think is kind of nonsense. The other thing, I keep hearing people, even very experienced, military people, saying things like, retake the Bagram Air Base. Well, I think the basic thing is really, should it have been abandoned before we completed our withdrawal of all of our civilians? And that's a totally different issue. To retake it now would involve a military operation, which would probably involve a fair number of casualties. I mean, I don't suppose the Taliban are just going to give it up without a fight. and the result is going to be a battle. And to some degree, obviously, the base was designed to be defended, so I suppose those defensive positions are being occupied by the Taliban. And so unless we really caught them napping, which I doubt we will, the fact of the matter is, if you tried that at this point, it's a battle. And I don't think Biden is going to be willing to take those kind of losses. You know, I mean, I think he wants to cut and run. That's my general opinion, not stay and fight. And so I don't think that that's currently a viable idea. But you know, it's one of those things that's out there. I mean, should it have been abandoned before we got all the people out? Probably not. But even then, its utility is mixed. The main utility it would have would be a place to project power from to influence the Taliban and other operators in the area. In other words, we could have attack aircraft based there, for instance. We could have helicopters based there, as well as it would be the best place for our airplanes to fly in and out from, of course. But again, that would be, you'd still have to get the people, many of whom were in Kabul, all right, to that base, which is not exactly, you know, an easy walk. It's not greatly distant, but it's not like it's next door. And remember, under the conditions we were in, they'd be going through Taliban country to get there. So the alternative then in that case would be to use helicopters from there and have designated pickup points. But who's going to secure those pickup points? You know, I mean, you begin to get the concept of what I'm saying here. This is all, there's no, I don't hope I'm saying pro-Biden here, but I'm saying that things of this sort, you can't pull the plug on the Afghan military and government and get your people out at the same time easily. The only way to have done that would have been to have, you know, continue to support them, because essentially the collapse of the Afghan military is basically because of the collapse of the support and the fact that they saw the handwriting on the wall that we were leaving, and so they began to realize that they were going to be left in the lurch rather shortly anyhow. And so this is a lot of, I mean, I think it's a mixed bag on the Afghans. I think a lot of it's kind of a mercenary army, basically. And so once they're not getting paid and once they know they're no longer going to be employed, they're gone. Other elements of it have certain other loyalties. I think there's this group in the Panjshir, I guess how you pronounce it, region, which probably the people from there, which were the traditional Northern Alliance fighters and those kind of people, I tend to think they were always the outfit that was the most resistant to the Taliban, and so they were probably much better combatants than we generally have the opinion of. You know, looking at the group from 12 years ago failing to do basic exercises and stuff. That group was a much feistier group, but it's a smaller group, and they're now back in their mountains and apparently fighting with the Taliban, who are trying to take over that region. So we don't know how that's going to work out, but wish them the best. But those groups were totally different than the perception of some of the other groups that we're talking about. Plus, apparently, a lot of the local people put people on the payroll who didn't really exist and then pocketed the money. They're paying. So, you know, so that's the situation there. But I'm just saying, so I think the idea that there was any clean way to get out of this thing, if you're going to just get out of it, was a mess. And anyhow, but, you know, everybody wanted out. I mean, I think everybody after Bush wanted out. I think Bush was the only one that really really was behind the mission, really. Everybody else was trying to figure out how to get out without getting burned, and I guess nobody could, and so eventually Biden got out and got burned. And that seems to be what's happening right now. I still think it was a mistake in the sense that everybody says it's a sunk cost, but to me, if you're going to have ongoing counterterrorism operations, and when we got it down to the level that we were no longer doing active combat anymore, really, we're just providing support and intelligence and logistics and things of that sort, maintenance, that sort of, you know, support. It looks to me like the question that is why pull your plug on that when we have other operations in Africa and elsewhere fighting terrorists there. I mean, it's not like, I think there's still troops in Syria, I think, and there's certainly some in Iraq. You know, so why that's the one you had to just dump like a hot potato, I don't know, but apparently it became that way. On the domestic front, which in a way is kind of somewhat more important here, long term, I mean, in a way, because we see the Congress is moving ahead with their massive spending plan. The Supreme Court, for instance, again overruled Biden's ban on evictions, and somebody was mentioning the other day that, well, there's $45 billion for rental support that was appropriated, but the idea of it was, I think they were going to give it to the renters. Well, that's not the. If you have if that's kind of another government mess up. The problem you have is there are plenty of people that have the money to pay the rent that aren't paying it because they have an eviction ban, and they probably early on didn't have the money or briefly didn't, but since they got all this, stimulus checks and all this enhanced unemployment benefits, and we're presume most of these people probably could have paid it, but probably didn't because they knew they couldn't be evicted. Well, so giving them more money, this means they'll probably just pocket that too. And that's one of the problems you have with it. So and all these people are not like corporate apartment complexes. A lot of them are people just own one or two houses they're renting out, and they're stuck having to pay the mortgage on these places, while the people that are in them are living pretty good on unemployment benefits, which in the liberal states are just about to end. They already have ended in a lot of conservative states, and I think there's some other litigation going on about that. But I think that phase is over with. So hopefully people will be going back to work. Of course, now we have the pandemic surging up again, just as all the countermeasures we put in place are running out. It continues to be a mess. And I don't know. Another bill that's been put forward is, of course, this H.R. 4, which is basically an attempt to give the Justice Department more power to come up with false claims of racial bias in voting rules and trying to have the federal government dictate how states conduct their elections. And so I don't know. I believe that the original rulings that they're trying to reverse were actually created. Were basically interpretations of the law that aren't the interpretations that the current House of Representatives want, and that's a fiasco of its own sort. On the other hand, you have. I guess the real question on this at some point is, how the Supreme Court will react to this bill if it were to get passed. Right now, again, it almost certainly will not pass as long as the filibuster holds, because while there might be 2 or 3 Republicans, your known suspects, that might vote for it, I think in general on this one, I think that to get the 60 vote threshold or even close is not very likely. So, it's basically it's trying to still punish states that used to be under the old Southern, rules from back in the bad old days, as they call them. At this time, where actually most of these Southern states have much more, if you will, open voting processes than the traditional Northern states have. I mean, compare something like a Delaware to a Texas or a Georgia, and there's a lot more early voting and absentee voting. All that stuff is much more prevalent in the Southern states now, yet they're still trying to act like they're discriminating. And of course, the real problem there usually is just the local Democrat-run counties that where the most minority populations and just do such a bad job of organizing things that things snarl up there. It's not so much anybody. After all, it's minority governments, if you want to call them that are actually making the decisions that lead to the problems that they're complaining about. At any rate, so that's another little tidbit. We'll see where that goes. And then, as I point out, one of the things that still give me a little bit of pause was the fact that the last act the Senate made before adjourning was passing a discharge petition on S1, which presumably is going to be modified to meet certain Joe Manchin requirements, which exactly what they all are. They apparently have to do with things like voter ID, and it certainly and other things. Apparently, it would it's unclear to me on that at this point, exactly what his modifications are and what they aren't. There's a lot of bad stuff in the S1 and H1 bills, and although a few elements are removed by his, amendments, it doesn't look to me like overall it's still an acceptable bill to me. So we don't know what will actually end up happening when they get back. Hopefully this is just an attempt by Manchin to try to consolidate his position within the Democratic Party, but really won't lead to a change in policy on the filibuster. The other possibility, well, it's two other possibilities. A really bad one that they have changed their mind on that, and the third one is it's an effort to negotiate with the Republicans some kind of a compromise, which I'm not sure what that would be. Obviously, we'd want to definitely ban vote harvesting, and we'd want to make the voter ID mandatory, not simply optional. And that's what I'm saying. If the current HR one, the original bill, actually prevented states from requiring voter ID. Well, there's two steps back from that. One is to allow them to, but not require it. The other would be for them to require it. On the other hand, this matching public money for private campaign contributions stuff seems a little suspect to me. I'm not sure that's a good idea. Ultimately, I'm not even sure who that would ultimately help the most, really. Theoretically, I guess it will help the Democrats. But, so anyhow, otherwise, why would the Democrats be proposing it? I don't think they do anything out of the goodness of their heart, right? So, but anyhow, these are issues that we'll be facing as Congress comes back, along with what tax increases really occur in these bills, and things of this sort. And we, don't know at this point, what all is going to happen. One of the things that's going to happen that's being proposed is currently, if somebody inherits stock from a relative, the basis for capital gains, if you sell it, is the date of death of the person that you're inheriting from. So in other words, it's a contemporary basis, and yet there may be a lot of capital gains that the other person accumulated over their lifetime. And the Biden proposal is to get rid of that, which means you'd have to go back and figure out when that stock was originally bought by the relative and use that as a capital gains, which in many cases is very difficult to do. Do you have all their old records? Do you know when they bought it? Well, maybe you do, maybe you don't. And that would be an issue. And the other thing, of course, is it would be a big tax haul. It'd pull money out of the capital markets and put into the social welfare coffers, obviously. But there's other, tax proposals, and supposedly, again, certain conservative, well, I wouldn't say I'm conservative, but let's say less liberal Democrats are pushing back on some elements of this, on the tax increases particularly. And so we don't know what's going to come out of this. It only takes one Democrat to vote for a Republican amendment, I think, in this reconciliation process to totally have that amendment pass. And if they stay the course, which is a big if, but if they did, then the House would be forced to eat whatever came out of that. My own guess is it won't be the full amount that's being discussed right now, and the taxes won't be quite as bad as being discussed right now, but it probably will be bad, and they probably will pass something. That would be my kind of pessimistic but realistic appraisal of the situation. But exactly how much gets pushed back? I think Manchin has said he's going to increase the corporate tax rate up to 25% from the current, I believe, 21. Instead of 28 like Biden wants, as an example. I don't know what else. I'm just trying to say that these are the kind of issues that are going to have to be settled in the future that will affect the taxes and the economy. And I guess the Fed is beginning to see that the need for a lot of loose money is kind of fading away, so we can expect that we'll be into somewhat of let's say less money printing than there is right now, but probably still quite a bit of printing. And so, anyway, I'll kind of wrap this up, but I just kind of wanted to hit a lot of the highlights in addition to our Afghanistan situation, and we'll just wait and hope we get our people out of there as safe as we can in the days ahead. This is a real, I think there's no doubt people are going to get left behind, unfortunately, and it looks to me like since we gave out lists of people that we want to get out to the Taliban, that may not be very good for their situation. And it looks like private individuals are playing a key role in getting people out now as well. Well, I'll close this for now. Until next time.